Okay, so welcome everyone. We're ready to start.
A todos, estamos prontos para começar.
And we're going to ask you to put yourself on mute. And let's get started today. We're very excited to be having this topic with Dr. Michael. So a warm welcome to Dr. Michael. And today the topic will be about metaphors, which is very exciting for me to be talking about this topic and having Dr. Michael with us here today. And in a moment, we'll be introducing the topic and we'll be talking about it. Before we do that, I'd like to welcome everyone joining from all the institutes, and we have people joining from different places all over the world. So as always, we're going to start by welcoming the institutes, and I'll be sharing here the slide of each institute. And once you see your slide, we want to have a very warm welcome from your own institute. So have your mic ready, unmute yourself, and once you see your institute, we want to have a cheer, like a celebration from your own institute using your own language and how you welcome people. So let's get started. And the first institute we have here is actually the Institute of the US. So US.
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you, thank you. And after that, we have the Institute of Egypt and Middle East and North Africa. We want to have a warm welcome from this institute.
Hello, everybody. Marhaba.
Hello.
And I also would like to welcome the 23 person who recently joined during our last ECMC. So we had 23 new meta coaches join in the Middle East and North Africa. So we want everyone to welcome them.
Wow.
Yes, welcome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Hello. Hello.
And now we have the Institute of South Africa. And Mauritius. Okay. Thank you. Then we have the institute here. Okay, so Philippines.
Mabuhay! Yay! Good to see you. Happy New.
Yes, and right now we're not sure if Geraldine is from the US or from the Philippines, so she get to choose, or she get to cheer both of them. Okay, and after
That's
that,
black and white thinking then.
yes, we have the Institute of Indonesia.
Yay!
Welcome everyone from Indonesia. Okay, and after that, we have the Institute of Brazil. A big welcome to Brazil.
Olá!
Ei, gente, oi. Vamos lá, gente, é para gritar lá. Na outra sala, não nessa aqui.
Okay, and the Institute of Australia. Since they are still sleeping.
We lost them down under.
Australia. Okay.
We can help them.
Okay. Thank you, Australia. Okay. And Institute of Europe.
Hello,
Hello.
everybody. How are you doing?
Hello, Jermaine.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello, Kai.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. And Institute of Malaysia. A big welcome.
Selamat datang semua.
How
Hi.
Mazuki, shall we help you? Where's everybody?
Yay! Well, I'm close enough with Malaysia, so.
And Institute of Latin America.
Hola, hola. Centroamérica, Sudamérica,
Hola.
México, bienvenidos.
Saludos. Hola.
De México.
Vamos.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. And we have the Institute of Scandinavia.
Hey!
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 Thank you. And after that, we have the Institute of Hong Kong and China, finally.
Instituto de Hong Kong e China.
Hello. 大家好.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So let me give you a quick brief about what we'll be doing and some frames. So this meeting, some of you have been joining our previous meetings, and some of you, this is your first meeting. So let me tell you a bit about these meetings. These meetings are mainly to share and get the knowledge and the wisdom we have from the rest of the community. And right now, this is led by Michael Hall, who have been generous to give us his time and present every other month this meeting and present a very useful topic as the meetings we had before. Right now, we meet every month. So every other month, we have this wisdom meetings. And the next month, we have the community meetings. So right now, we meet twice. Actually, we meet once every month, and we have these meetings. And the main purpose of these meetings are to connect, to collaborate together, to share our wisdom, to share our experience, and to learn from each other. And if you have missed the previous meetings, I would highly recommend to go to our Facebook group and also to our YouTube channel and to watch the previous videos. We had a lot of useful content during the previous periods. So in case you have been during our meetings before, you know what we do. In case this is your first time, let me give you an overview. These meetings last for 90 minutes. And during this 90 minutes, we want you to have your audio on mute so Michael and the presenters can talk without disruption. And if you have questions, please do send them. And before writing them in the chat, write the word question or just Q before the question. So the moderator can know that this is a question and can send it to the host who's interviewing Michael and asking Michael the question. We will be taking pictures at the end. So at the very end, don't leave, and we'll be asking you to turn on your camera. Actually, we want you to keep your camera on during the whole presentation. Just mute yourself, keep the camera on during the whole presentation so we can see you, so we can connect, and we can see who's attending with us. But at the very end, make sure that your camera is on and you look extra nice. Okay, so because we'll be taking pictures. Okay. Yes, and finally, make sure that we stay together and we want to refresh our knowledge from these meetings. We want to connect and we want to recharge our energy and see each other. Maybe we're not able to meet in person because of the corona and what's happening in the world, and hopefully that will be ending soon. But even though that's happening, we're still connecting online and we're still seeing each other and we're still connecting here. Okay, so after we finish, we'll be putting the video on YouTube and all the pictures will be on Facebook. You have access to that, and we'll be announcing the links for these. You can check on the e-group after we end today. Okay, some quick Zoom etiquette, if in case this is the first time for you to attend. Make sure that your audio is good. There's no audio feedback. Preferably to wear a headset like this, especially if you're going to speak. Make sure that your name appears on the Zoom, the right name for you, and make sure that during the presentation you're on mute and your camera is on. Thank you, and we're ready to start. And by that, I would like to introduce my my host today, and that will be Karen. Thank you so much, and please give her a big hand. And thank you for leading this today. And let's have fun. Give her a big hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate all the silent clapping that we're getting. I'm just going to spotlight Michael for all of us. There we go. Michael, Geraldine, it's lovely to connect with you today. And I am in suspense about our topic. Metaphors are like a good detective story. Michael, where do we start this story?
We're ready to start, huh?
Yes, we are ready to start.
Is this backwards? On my screen?
No, it's not backwards. We can see it well.
Well, metaphors is a major aspect of how you and I think, feel, speak, conceptualize, embody, get into states. All of those are coded by metaphors. So as we get started, I'd like to help you tune up your ears for hearing metaphors. I'll go slow so the translators can translate. We are planning a training, not a moon landing. If you do this, you won't be able to put the genie back in the bottle. Let's surgically cut out that excuse. Just listen and run my proposal up a flagpole. Let's see if it'll fly. Let's walk that idea back a few steps and start over. I think you're throwing him under the bus. You have separated things into watertight compartments. When you set a frame, you put your life under new management. It's time to unravel the meaning's fabric. Are you waiting for a conveyor belt of resources to carry you forward? Okay, let's step into the high wire and take the risk. If you thought that this X was a question and you used it as a springboard for living more effectively, what would that question be? Metaphors upon metaphors upon metaphors. It is estimated that every time you open your mouth and have a discussion with someone, every minute you will be producing 6 to 10 metaphors. So metaphors are everywhere. We could go further to say that every single word is a metaphor, because every single word stands for something other than what it is. So thinking metaphorically. You and I think metaphorically, but most of the time the metaphors are hiding. They're hiding and sneaking behind the curtains of our mind so that we are not even aware it's a metaphor. We think it's real. So as we get started, I'd like to suggest some things about metaphors that will help us to position what metaphors are, and you can see those here on the chart. A metaphor is first and foremost a comparison. So the first question about any metaphor is, you're comparing what to what? It's a comparison. So you're looking for similarities. So the people who have the easiest time with metaphors would be people matching. You're matching, comparing one thing to another. At the same time, you're contrasting something. So differences are hidden in metaphors. Every metaphor has lots of differences where the metaphor does not work. And so there'll be those contrasts in the metaphors. The metaphor will therefore highlight one thing and hide another. It's just the way it works. The hidden part will be your unconscious communications, for the most part, whether to yourself or to someone else. And when you use metaphors, it really is like a fingerprint of your thinking. It actually tells us a lot about you. And metaphors are not just fancy ways of saying things and not just figurative language. When you have a metaphor, the metaphor will get into embodiment. In fact, the orientation metaphors are the sneakiest ones of all. Someone says, I'm into NOP. Into is a metaphor of a container, and I'm putting myself into that. Every time we use the word on, after, before, when, since, all of these are metaphors. So every language has its own way of doing metaphors. In English, we speak about the face of the mountain. Well, the mountain doesn't have a face, but in some languages, some of the Indonesian, some of the Pacific Ocean languages, what I would call the face of the mountain, they would call the behind of the mountain. So metaphors. They're the ways that we conceptualize different things, and the metaphor you use can either be resourceful, unresourceful, healing, toxic. It can be empowering. It can be imprisoning and limiting and toxifying. So chasing out the metaphor. In Neuro-Semantics, we use 10 meta states, meta levels to cover just about everything: beliefs and values, intentions, decision, anticipation, frames, meanings. And one of them is metaphor. And the way to get the metaphor would be to ask, what are you comparing to what? So this gives us the structure, the idea of a metaphor and the structure. So here's metaphorical structuring. And in terms of the structuring of the metaphor, you take the metaphor, which is going to be sensory rich. Earlier, we talked about raining out some knowledge, sprinkling some knowledge. Maybe the rainbow will come out if the sun comes out. And so this is going to be sensory rich. It's going to be what you can see and hear and feel. And this is going to be the concept. I want to understand learning as a concept. Learning is like an exploration. It's like a discovery. So we have the source, we have the target, and when you meta for Ryan, you carry over the source to the target. And now we have a metastate structure. So every time you use a metaphor, you're metastating. You're bringing a target to a target, some source. And so here's the structural relationship of a metaphor. You actually have two semantic domains, two semantic fields that you're now connecting. And this is the source of creativity. This is the source of innovation. This is the source of how to come up with new and creative ways of thinking about something, solving a problem, experiencing your own life. So it's that relationship between source and target. With source and target, however, there's going to be other things. So we have the source to the target, and there's going to be the comparisons and the contrasts, similarities and differences, but there's also going to be some entailments. This here is a metaphor itself. When a cat enters a room or a dog enters a room, the dog enters and also its tail. So every time you have a metaphor, there's going to be some entailments, some things brought in with the metaphor that do not apply, or that might apply even more so, but they're entailments. We talk about building up a concept. Well, that's an architectural metaphor, building up, but we don't talk about the mortar that we put between the bricks. We don't even talk about the bricks. We talk about building up, and we don't talk about the substance. Is it sheetrock? Is it stone? Is it wood? So those would be entailments of the metaphor. And some of these entailments will be unconsciously picked up by people, and some of them will not be. And so you might have to do some inferential listening and learning to find out what's implied by the metaphor. Metaphors also will have fragments, fragment pieces that come along with a metaphor. And so here are two more things to start asking about when you're using. Once we have the source to the target, above and beyond that, at unconscious levels, we're going to have the implications, the FBIs. So what are the frames by implication that come along with a metaphor? Communication is like a war. So we take war, bring it to the target, communicating. And this war, it's a fight, it's a battle. There's weapons. Somebody may die. It's dangerous. It's oppositional. It's people in conflict with each other. If we change the metaphor, communicating is like a dance. We have a whole new set of similar. How is it like a dance? What is the contrast that you're setting up with that metaphor? What are the fragments that come out of communication as a dance? And what's implied? Well, there's rhythm, there's movement, there's interaction, there's dialogue. And above the implication would be even more hidden premises with whatever metaphor we use, premises that oftentimes come from the live experience from which the metaphor came. So metaphors are quite complex.
Michael, that was quite a mouthful to start off with. If I can just go back, can we go back to that first screen just a little bit? So you say that there are similarities. What kind of similarities are we referring to?
Well, there's many kind of similarities. There can be the similarity of what it looks like. It's similar in look. It's similar in function. It's similar in origin. So there could be a whole range of how is it similar? In what ways is it similar?
Okay. And then fingerprints of thinking, that in itself is such a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah.
What are you referring to there? And is that part of our detective story?
Well, the detective story metaphor highlights how complex it is, that you have to do some detective work. You have to do some analytical work. You have to be like Sherlock Holmes. You have to be like Nancy Drew, to ask a lot of questions, to suppose that there is an appearance and then there's the reality.
Okay, all right. And then we will look for those fingerprints of thinking of the metaphors that this person is using.
Yeah.
Michael, you mentioned, oh, sorry, yes, go for it.
I haven't done it, but a person could go through most of the meta programs and identify different metaphors that would be similar to that kind of thinking. And so the metaphors you use correspond to different meta programs and reveals thinking patterns.
Can you give us an example?
Well, if we use the war example, because a lot of people use war language when they talk about communication. And since NLP is primarily a communication model, when we talk about that cut me down, that blew me away, he's always hiding what he's really wanting to say. Well, we're talking about oppositional war language. His words hurt me. So you cannot have that kind of a metaphor unless you have some presuppositions about words and about language. And that would be, his words hurt me would be a metaphor that's pretty toxic because you're giving all your power away.
And you might lose a toe in the process. So, Michael, neurological embodiments, are you saying there that a metaphor will induce me into a state?
It will induce you into a state, but it'll do much more. And this, if anybody wants to really read into the subject, the book to read is Metaphors We Live By Mark Johnson. Mark Johnson and George Lakoff wrote book after book after book on metaphors and the metaphorical nature of language, and that we live by these metaphors. So if you have a client and they say something like, her words cut me to the quick, then if you ask, what state does those words, that metaphor put you in, which is probably a victimization state, and then how do you feel that state? and how deep is that neurology, then you might discover that it's the metaphor that's creating so much of the physical as well as psychological. So we have a whole set of metaphors called organ language. He gives me a headache. She's a pain in the ass. So she'll be the death of me yet. I mean, these are metaphors, that organ language that is sending a message to the body. And the body will try to fulfill it. Will try to actualize it.
I'm heartbroken.
Heartbroken.
Okay. So Michael, you mentioned the matching meta program working well with the comparison portion. Mismatching then for contrasts?
So the mismatching will find the not metaphor. And so
not metaphor.
And that's a whole other domain of metaphor, how we negate things with metaphor. In the book, Thinking Metaphorically, I have a whole chapter, and I think I've got 30 negations, 30 metaphorical negations. And negations are ways that you can make things go away.
Okay.
And so in NLP, we have, see that on the windshield of your life, and now let the windshield wipers just wipe it away. A negation metaphor. See that going out to the sun and blowing up. Another negation metaphor. So there's hundreds of them.
Okay. So Michael, we have a question from the room. What is the difference between a metaphor and an idiomatic expression? And what are the distinctions?
Most idiomatic expressions are metaphors that have been around for a while. And so now we say it's an idiom. It's an expression people use, and usually it's metaphorical. One in the hand is worth two in the bush. That is, focus on what you got and not on the possibilities that don't exist yet. That'd be propositional language. So here's an idiomatic phrase that is a metaphor. And so metaphors will take idioms, proverbs, a different kind of wise sayings, figurative language. It'll take lots of different forms, stories, jokes.
Okay. Michael, going back to that other slide, I'm sorry, I'm getting you to turn your screen for us. No, this one, yes, this one. So Michael, you said that learning plays a big role. And to tie back to what you had said in the previous session about experiential learning being real true learning, how can we experience the subject of metaphors in a way that we walk away with an experiential learning today?
So you would ask the basic metaphor question. What is this learning like? And then your answer to it will be both an anchor for you, a way to trigger that learning, and a way to think about that learning. The thing with every metaphor is, just like with everything else, we need to step back and do an ecology check. Is this metaphor healthy? Where is it taking me? What is it inducing in my body? So always doing the ecology check with a metaphor to make sure that it's a good, healthy metaphor.
And is the ecology question then the way that we flush out those entailments?
That is one way that we can do that.
Okay.
Metaphors imply. So every metaphor implies things. And so this is where inferential listening and learning comes in. What is implied? What else is implied? What else is implied? So when I take something as a source, there's lots of things about that source that do not apply. What does apply and what does not? And can I keep what does not apply out of it? This is where every metaphor breaks down. Every metaphor breaks down. A metaphor breaking down. You write a metaphor so far, then you have to get off. Because if you keep writing, you might go over the cliff. So knowing when to get off of the metaphor. Now, extensive metaphors, we've used a few of those in neurosemantics, like dragon slaying. So dragon slaying is a metaphor. We're going to get out our sword. We're going to find this dragon, this unresourceful state, and we're going to either tame it, transform it, or slay it. So that's the metaphor. And I've told this story many times. When I first published dragon slaying in 1996, there was two NLP journals in Germany that condemned the book because they said I was endangering, I was threatening endangered creatures. You know, at some point, it's a metaphor. No animals have been hurt in producing this book.
Nor is it recommended. But Michael, then that I suppose speaks to the cultural nature, like you mentioned, also the face or the ass of the mountain, although that's not perhaps the exact word you used. All right, so it is effective in coaching process. So a question from the audience: is it effective in the coaching process to ask the client, what metaphor will you use to describe your current condition and why?
Definitely. Because then you're going to get the target or the source references that are metastating the target. So exactly. James Lawley, Penny Thompson, two NLP trainers, have written the book Symbolic Modeling. And it is going after the metaphors and modeling a person's internal landscape, modeling their metaphorical landscape. And so that's a pretty significant facet of NLP, people who do the symbolic modeling. So they're modeling the symbol, the metaphor.
As you say that, what comes up for me is also social panorama and how we map our internal world in metaphors.
Yes, that's a whole other metaphorical way of dealing with the stuff inside our heads. Where do you put it? Do you put it up or down, in front or behind? Is it big? Is it small? All of those are orientational metaphors dealing with space and movement.
Okay.
The biggest metaphor we use in neurosemantics probably is the matrix model. The idea that there's a matrix of frames, not only vertical and horizontal, but in depth. And inside that matrix, we construct our reality. We send the messages to our bodies, and we live in that make-believe world. And so as a metaphor, it speaks about our meaning constructions.
Okay. So Michael, going back to now the third screen that you have up there, the third page. Looking for a word there. Okay, so fragments. Can you please explain that a little bit to me?
Well, there's going to be all kinds of entailments and fragments. There's things broken off. This is where we can use humor. We can use metaphors humorously. Metaphors can be a lot of fun. Metaphors can be playful and silly and ridiculous as we start thinking, what else can we bring from the source to that target? and what applies and what doesn't, and what's just silly. And that's where a lot of the fragments are it's just silliness. So I am raining down a whole lot of data on you and hope you will get wet, soaking wet, immersed in metaphors today. But I hope the worms don't come out from the ground and bite your toes. So, so that's the fragments and how we can be really playful. As a coach, when a person shares their metaphors and their metaphors are serious and toxic, this is where play with it. So communication is like a war. Are you using knives, swords, or guns? The guns, are they automatic guns? Or are they one shot at a time? Or the shotgun? And as a person starts thinking, it can break down the metaphor. Do you have body armor? Do you duck that shot? Do you have a triage there ready to help you recuperate when you get shot? So this is the fragments and the entailments of a metaphor.
Okay. So Michael, I'm going to give over to you to carry on with your prepared training. Thank you for satisfying my curiosity thus far.
So the word metaphor is quite literally a metastating word. So for those of us who use metastates as a basic model for understanding the layers that a person does, going up metaphor after metaphor. What metaphor would be the best metaphor that would embrace this idea, this experience, this resource? And given that metaphor, what would be a metaphor of that metaphor? So metaphorein is to keep carrying over again and again, something that is like it, but now we're talking about it in different language and metaphorical language. And when we talk about it in different language, it opens up all kinds of new ideas, thoughts, awarenesses, understandings. The metaphor of hierarchy of needs. In Neuro-Semantics, we speak about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow wisely never used the word pyramid. He never used that word. That was imposed upon his work after he had died. And there's in none of his books will you ever see a pyramid. The pyramid actually is not a very helpful metaphor, because the entailment of a pyramid is it doesn't move. It's static. It's solid. It's stuck. So I played around with the metaphor of the pyramid and turned it into a volcano, so that it's spitting out fire and it's shooting out to the stars. So this is where started with one metaphor that wasn't so useful, and we tempered it with another metaphor. And so being aware of the metaphors. Sigmund Freud started the whole field of psychology by using the iceberg metaphor. Everything in you is an iceberg, and 90% of everything is hidden deep, deep, deep down. Well, the problem with the metaphor of depth is that when you go down, it goes smaller, smaller, deeper, darker. It's not a very positive metaphor. So I turned the whole thing around when we did metastates and to go up. And so the up metaphor rather than the depth metaphor. And so we're using metastating structures when we think about these things. And so when you're metaphoring and when you're being a good metaphorian, then you're doing that. That leads to the skills. the first thing is to detect metaphors. And for a lot of coaching clients, it'll be an insight and awareness when you start detecting their metaphors and bringing to their awareness what's been in unawareness. And so detecting. If every minute you're producing 6 to 10 metaphors, then most of us have no clue. We haven't tuned our ears to hear metaphors. So the first skill is to learn to detect them. Oh, that's a metaphor. And that will create a whole new way of thinking, and it'll expand your thinking when you try to listen for metaphors. By detecting them, then you can discover the metaphors that are most influential in your mind and your life. Now, most metaphors that we use come from the source experiences that we have. If you do a lot of swimming, then it'll be easy for you to take swimming and put it on to something, and you can swimmingly play with this concept. You can splash around and see how deeply immersed you can get into the pool of understanding. So discovering the metaphors and then either playing with them or doing something else. Analyzing the metaphors comes down to knowing about all these different components of a metaphor. And we've already mentioned a lot of these components of metaphors. In terms of the components, there's the source reference and the target reference. There's the comparisons and the contrasts. There's the entailments. There's the quality of the metaphor. There's the use of the metaphor. There's the implications of the metaphor. And so to do a good analysis of a metaphor and to play with it. Somebody says, it's like I'm up against a wall. Well, let's start analyzing. What kind of wall? Is it made out of stone, out of wood, out of marshmallows? How tall is the wall? Is the wall 2 feet tall, 5 feet tall? Is it 20? Is it 100? How thick is the wall? Bob Bodenhammer told me once about a client who said exactly that to him. It's like a wall in front of me. He was talking about wanting to go date, but scared of dating. And Bob said, what is that like? And he said, well, it's like a wall. And Bob says, do you have a jackhammer? And the guy said, I don't know. Well, do you know what a jackhammer is? And he said, yeah, well, use it. Does the wall have any doors in it? So you start analyzing the metaphor just by asking all these questions about the metaphor that is brought forth. Running with a metaphor is doing some of what I've been doing now, running with it, seeing how far you can take it. Where does the metaphor normally take a person, and how much further could we go? So running with it, and when you're running with it, you're playing with it as well. And when you're playing with it, you're intentionally seeking to humorize it and to take it out of the serious mode into the playful mode. Reversing a metaphor. Many metaphors can be just completely reversed. So communicating at work is like a war. So when did you start this war? So reverse it. It's not them fighting against me. It's me going in there like Rambo. So reversing a metaphor, and there's lots of, I got a whole chapter in the book on reversing metaphors. Same thing with negating, making the metaphor go away, blow up. Just flush it. Do a meta flush and negate it. Playing with it is for humor, and then creating metaphors. one of the first books in the field of NLP was David Gordon's book, Therapeutic Metaphors. And he wrote a whole book, 1978, on how to construct a hypnotic metaphor for psychological healing or physiological healing. And so designing the metaphor so that you take components in a person's life and get a metaphor that will correspond to most of those facets of the person's life, design it as a story, and then deliver it as a story. And bingo, it's an extended metaphor that you've created, that you've designed, and that you can use. Priming with a metaphor would be any kind of pre-framing that initiates especially a state that sets a person up to be ready for the metaphor. So those are 10 skills to be a great metaphorian.
Oh, you make it sound so simple, Michael. So I just want to go back to detecting and discovering. As you were saying that, I was wondering whether there's a specific representational system that has it easier to detect and discover. So which representational system do we actually use best in that space?
Well, because the visual system is the most vivid and dramatic representational system we have, and because more parts of our brain, there's 6 visual aspects of our brain processing visual information, visual metaphors will obviously be most impactful. But metaphors can be in the auditory system, it can be in the kinesthetic system. And of course, when you use all of them together, then they're most impactful.
What came up for me also is that if I do some literal thinking and really see that person splashing around in that information, it's also easier to see the metaphor.
Yeah.
So Michael, we've got some questions. Are people who use metaphors regularly talented, or have they learned how to just use it in the proper context?
Well, every word out of your mouth is a metaphor, because all language is metaphorical. And people are using metaphors that they're just unconscious. Metaphors hide. They lurk around in our lives and they sneak around and they hide. And if a person isn't aware of the metaphors, it's just a case they're not aware. Someone says in a coaching session, that insult was a slap in the face. We tend to hear it literally and don't immediately recognize and detect, oh, a metaphor, kinesthetic metaphor, slap in the face. Slap in the face, I know what a slap in the face is. I'm taking that source and I'm bringing it to these words called an insult. And so now I've just created a pretty toxic metaphor.
Another question. So how do we as people become aware of, how do I become aware of my own metaphors?
Print off your emails that you write and look for metaphors in them. Because there's going to be lots of metaphors in it. What I did, I turned on Netflix and watched Netflix with a notebook, writing down metaphors. I wrote down thousands, not hundreds, thousands. Every night, I'm still capturing, like butterflies, more metaphors to put into my net. Because they're everywhere. Once you tune your ears to them, the whole world becomes a funny show, which is a metaphor.
What is the recommended process that, so you mentioned now this, watching Netflix with a notebook. How will we best get to a resourceful metaphor for myself?
Well, the only way you can know that is to just do a quality control check, check the ecology of it to make sure that it's ecological. It's in detecting metaphors and making sure that they're ecological. That's where the analysis helps. What is the source? What's implied? What comparisons am I making? What comparisons am I not making? What entailments are there? Geraldine and I were having a conversation last week. I was working on the subject of executive wisdom. And I had a chapter, I've got a chapter in that book on discernment and deliberation. And I put deliberation before discernment. And so that led us to a discussion. Well, here are two normalizations. One place that metaphors hide are in single words. So when we found deliberation, D and libera, and Latin, and it meant scale. It meant weighing. It meant pounds. Well, when people used to deliberate on how much do I charge you in the market, let me put the onions here and get the scale, and I'll put a weight here, and it will balance out, and that's the deliberation. The deliberation is the deciding, the weighing, the leveling out of two things. So I said that comes first, then you do, or that comes after you do distinctions. You make distinctions before you do that. Because if you put onions and chicken and some beef and some celery on the scale, you're gonna get one price for all of them. Whereas if you distinguish, you distinguish, and the word distinguish means to separate. So here's the idea. Let me separate the onions from the chicken and the radishes from the beef. And then after I've distinguished, now I can deliberate on each one. So if you're going to be wise, you need to distinguish first, then deliberate. And inside of that description are two really significant metaphors coming from ancient cultures.
Beautiful examples. Thank you, Michael. So a question from the audience. How does David Grove's work on clean language relate to application of metaphors?
James and Penny used clean language to do their symbolic modeling. So it came from David Grove's work. David Grove was trying to clean out language. But the problem is there is no clean language. That's the problem. When I did a review of the book, Symbolic Language, years ago, I wrote that while James and Penny and David Grove, while I honor and respect their intention of cleaning the language as much as possible, when you ask, where is that wall, you have just imposed your own thought about space. When you say, how big is the wall, you've imposed. So there is no such thing as clean language. There's language that's cleaner than other language. But that's what the clean language idea is. I quote all the clean language stuff in the book, and then I extend it into questions the clean language people can't ask, because they put that limitation on themselves that you cannot impose. And implication and inference, we infer what's being implied, is a process by which I can go deeper and further than what clean language would take me.
Okay. We already know that we are showing the fingerprints of our thinking. So how clean is it going to be? Michael, they're asking for more examples of the skill of prime and how to use that.
Well, that's a whole nother subject, priming. Priming is inducing a response potential. So it's not inducing a response, it's reducing a potential to respond. My daughter Jessica, when she was 4 years old, 5 years old, I knew that when we got in the car and we were going to take a long trip to grandparents' home, and I say long trip, 2 days traveling, I always wanted her to go to the restroom before we left the house. So I would say to her, I would talk about the swimming pool. I would talk about the running water that I hear in the bathroom. I would talk about the all kinds of water events. And sure enough, just within a few minutes, she would go, wait, I need to go to the restroom. Well, that's priming, the potential to respond by using something. So if I want someone to respond with more integrity, integrity is about, or alignment, integrity and alignment, getting something straight, then all I have to do is prime things that need to be straightened out. Look at all that spaghetti. Wouldn't it be nice to straighten that spaghetti out? My glasses, I think they're a little twisted. Let me put them on. Oh, that's straighter. So I'm using sensory-based things, glasses, spaghetti, and it is suggesting, implying, but not saying about alignment.
Thank you. Another question. So apparently, and I missed that. My filters did not hear you mention a metaphor field. It's asked, what is the metaphor field that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation?
This is a metaphorical field. I've taken a source and I brought to a target. And I've activated these processes to occur, and that has activated these processes. So that's a field. And then, of course, any particular metaphor will fit into all of that when you start filling it out.
Okay. Michael, what's the difference between a direct and an indirect metaphor?
Well, I don't know that there is any distinction. If you're using a metaphor, if somebody says, this is not my first rodeo, so they're not saying, let me use a metaphor. I mean, I guess that's direct. Very seldom do we do that. Usually we have to call it forth. People will say a metaphor when they say things like, in other words, or it's as if, and that will indicate that a metaphor is coming. But very few people say, a metaphor just popped in my mind, let me share it with you. They just go right, they just say, this is not my first rodeo. So then I take everything I know about a rodeo and I bring it to the subject and know that he knows how to get on the bull. He knows how to ride the bull. He's going to get knocked off that bull. He knows how to get up and take care of his bruises.
I heard you there use like and is. This is not my first rodeo, and it's like. So those are also where they hide.
Yeah. Now, technically, we've got a metaphor when it's like, and we've got a simile when it's as. but that's just a technicality of language. It's metaphors.
Okay. Another question. As a way of improving skills of building metaphors, what do you think about representing the human needs as a tree? The roots would be the physiological needs. The trunk would be the safety needs. The branches would be the social needs. The foliage would be the self-esteem needs, and the fruits would be the self-actualization needs. Michael, are you there?
I think we lost him to the metaphor.
To the tree. I saw that he asked Geraldine to get something, so I don't know, maybe they ran out of power.
Mm-hmm.
So, Iman, can you tell us a joke, seeing that you're unmuted with me?
Michael
Yes.
is lost in the matrix. I think it's because
Somebody
of
says
David's
Michael
questions.
is lost in the matrix.
That's a metaphor.
Life is like a box of chocolate. It implies that it's very sweet.
I like Caroline's. Running out of power is a good metaphor.
It's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to invite everyone, don't be shy with your questions. We still have a few minutes left. So anything that's popping up, please share your questions.
How do you share your questions? What does that metaphor means? You share them.
There he is. He's coming back. Meet him, Michael. Michael is lost in space.
Mazuki, I see you also unmuted. What did you want to share with us?
Spill it out, Marzuki. Spill it out.
Ah, Michael is back.
Hey.
I personally I'm very relieved to see you back.
Yep, the computer went out.
Out where?
That's right.
It
So
went
out
somewhere.
is one of those orientational metaphors. Yeah, it went out. Because the metaphor implies the computer is a person and it got up and left. Went from one place to another. So metaphor, everybody is speaking metaphors.
Willem is asking that it go out for dinner. So Michael, there's a request for you to say a bit more about metaphors.
Well, so there's levels of metaphors. There's the first level, the second level, the third level. And so that's part of the analysis. You can, and once you analyze what am I comparing this to, and you get your first metaphor, you can then ask what's implied and what is that like? So you can go up the levels. What is that like? Again and again and again.
Michael, so you mentioned inferential listening, and it's about what is implied. What's your inside trick to really build that skill up?
Well, so when you're inferring something that's implied, then it has to be logically there. So this is where the more you know about the source, the more you can infer from that source. So if I know nothing about a rodeo, it would be hard for me to know about a bull, riding a bull, what that's all about. the more I know that, the more I can infer what is implied when someone from that source is using that source. If I don't know anything about the ocean, I've never been on the ocean, don't know about tides or waves or any of that stuff, and then I start talking about dealing with this problem at work is like stopping the tides. So I need to know more about the source, and now I can infer here's a unstoppable force coming in. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Although in that case, that might be a really bad metaphor to use, because you're going to feel real, because then you would ask about the embodiment. When do you think about work and it's like stopping a tide, how do you feel? Probably it's not resourceful, but helpless, hopeless, victim. So what if we change that metaphor? We could reverse the metaphor. Let's reverse it. Instead of work being the tide that comes in, what if you're the tide? Just reverse it. You're the tide. And imagine how you're going to land on the shore of your work.
Okay. So going back to the metaphor of representing the human needs as a tree, I'm just going to repeat that, seeing that your computer went out. The roots would be the physiological needs. The trunk would be the safety needs. The branches would be the social needs. The foliage would be the self-esteem needs. And the fruits would be the self-actualization needs.
Well, it'll convey some truths. It does not immediately strike me as a very useful metaphor.
Because?
Well, some of the entailments, some of the fragments that come along with that, that would reduce all of the self-esteem the being needs as somewhat extra. The tree can be alive and growing and doing just well without the fruits. So that does not fit for the being needs. The being needs are actually a person needs meaning, knowledge, beauty, purpose, intent, love. A person needs those actually more so than the lower needs.
And if it's winter and you lose the foliage, there goes your self-esteem.
Yeah, so then the seasons would not be very good to that metaphor.
Okay, so some more questions. Metaphors requiring good intercultural skills.
I'll get to that in just a second. This is where analyzing the metaphor, running with it, playing with it, turning it over, reversing it, helps you to think through how good is this metaphor. So that's where the more you do that, then you might say, nah, that metaphor is not going to be that useful. It only get me so far. It's fairly shallow.
Okay.
In terms of culture, what you need to know is the source. So every culture is just, here's a group of people who have developed this way, interacting, believing, it's a ritual, you just need to know the source. And when you know the source, then you can use that ritual or that metaphor in whatever way you want to use it. But a lot of cultural metaphors are really sick. So the cultural metaphor of communication in most of the world, not just the West, but most of the world has been communication is a battle.
Mm.
And it's really a sick metaphor because it leads to competition. You're my opponent, you're my enemy. And when you're my enemy, you're my opponent in business, then how can I collaborate? How can we do any kind of collaboration if I'm fighting for the same piece of the pie that you're fighting for?
So those analysis skills become as important as the detection skills.
Exactly. The one skill I don't have listed on the sheet is the challenging skill, challenging metaphors, because metaphors need to be challenged, because just like any belief, any thought, any reference, it may not be very useful. And so learning to challenge the metaphors. I did that a few months ago when I walked into Starbucks one morning. The lady at Starbucks said, "How is the world treating you?" And I said, that is not the question that should be answered. She said, "Well, what's the question?" "How am I treating the world?" I said, because how is the world treating you presupposes my state, my emotions, my experience is a function of how the world is treating me. I'm just the passive recipient victim.
Perceive a metaprogram much.
Say that again.
Perceive a metaprogram much.
So hearing those metaphors, I mean, when you hear the phrase, "How is the world treating you?" do you immediately hear a metaphor? So that's where the detection comes in. And if you answer the question, then if you answer that question, "How is the world treating you?" then all the implications of you being helpless, you being a victim, you being dependent upon the world and how it treats you, it just comes in unquestioned.
Michael, so is that an example of reversing the metaphor then? To say, no, it's how is the world treating me?
Another reversal is when people say, "Thank God it's Friday." So here's a metaphor. The metaphor is the implication that you have to infer is that Friday is the end of work. So thank God work is over, which implies that you've been working and not enjoying yourself. You've been working and not playing. You've been working and nothing, and it's just all been toil and burdensome. So thank God it's Friday as a metaphor. So when people say that to me, I say, well, thank God it's soon going to be Monday. I reverse it.
Which could also imply some things, Michael.
Yeah, but at least it's a shock to challenge the old metaphor.
So, Michael, another question on cultural metaphors regarding illness and the immune system.
Okay.
Could you give us some examples?
Well, that's where the organ language comes in, and different cultures will play with that. In English, we say, she's a headache, or he gives me a headache, or what a pain in the ass. So we use I can't stomach my boss. So the danger of these metaphors, this organ language, is that it can lead to the embodiment of that message. And
even the immune system being at war. that in itself, that's how we got taught as children how the body works.
So that's what the Simpson brothers did in their original work in the 1990s on cancer. They were in Dallas, at the hospital in Dallas, and that's the metaphor they use of thinking about the white blood cells as little Pac-Man going around in the body, fighting, eating up all of the bad cells, and as a war. So yeah, it's just probably not the best metaphor for the sense of healing and wellness. A metaphor of flushing out would probably be better, that the white blood cells finds the cells that not supposed to be there, the not me cells, and it just lets it flush it out of the system.
Yeah. I've heard Robert Dills also using white, woolly, soft sheep grazing as a metaphor. Michael, there's another question. Couldn't we go crazy if we started detecting all metaphors? As a coach, is it to go more with the semantically loaded ones?
Well, definitely, of course. Yeah, we've lost people that way. Metaphor. Yeah, of course we go after the semantically loaded ones. Although, you know, it's just so subtle. Take the word interest. It's a metaphor. It comes from Latin, inter esse, to exist inside. So when I take interest, I put myself inside something. If you want to be bored, don't put yourself inside. Don't take interest. So here's a metaphor, and it speaks volumes, and it's one word.
And it might not be so semantically loaded in the moment.
In the moment, it may not be semantically loaded.
Okay.
Take the word have. I tease Geraldine about this all the time. She says, I have a question. Well, people say, I have a problem. I have a headache. And the word have is a very subtle, not so good metaphor, because have means possession. And when you possess something, when you own it, when you possess it, then you could lose it. Someone could take it from you. You need to protect it. And so having a headache. So this is where we are neurolinguistic, neurosemantic creatures, and the words we say says a lot. And so be careful about that. I'm head aching. Would be a much better way of doing it. I have depression, or I'm depressing. In fact, this is what in reality therapy, the author recommended: turn all emotional nouns or nominalizations into verbs. I'm anxieting, I'm fearing, I'm joying, I'm contenting, I'm loving. Turn them into nouns, verbs rather than nouns, because the word have leads to a possession. And so how long have you had depression? Well, I've had depression for 10 years. You know, and it just, talk about a toxic metaphor.
Michael, we have not a lot of time. We do not have a lot of time left. One last question. A really resourceful, useful metaphor for life that we can take away from this session?
Well, the metaphors we generally use are things of growing, of insight and seeing more, experiencing more, being more. Those are metaphors that we usually use for unleashing potential, actualizing possibilities. And so these are metaphors that are much more resourceful and that open up all sorts of ideas.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us so openly and freely today. I am gratituding.
Good.
And now I'm going to hand over back to Mohammed for the photos. We have a few minutes left for that. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Geraldine.
Now we're photoing.
Yeah, so thank you, Karen, for that. And thank you, Michael, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your knowledge. That was very useful as always. And as Karen said, now it's time for the photos. So quick information about how we'll do that. I want you all to start turning on your camera. Have a big smile on your face. That should take a minute or less. That's our plan. During that time, please refrain from sending any messages in the chat box. So please, no messages in the chat box. And we will be taking the pictures right now. So if you want to make your hair, that's the time to do that. Get ready. Turn on your camera. Ready. Okay, put a big smile on your face. And we'll start. Another smile. Okay, and we took the pictures. Thank you everyone for joining today. That was really a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'm very excited to have with you us today. So let me remind you of our next meeting. So our next meeting will be next month, and that will be the community meeting. As we said today at the beginning of the meeting, we have 2 meetings, one every month or every other month. So the next meeting will be next month, and will be on the 9th of October. That will be the community meeting. We'll be sending more details about that and the login details for that, but you can put it on your calendar right now. That will be on the 9th of October. That will be the community meeting we have. Thank you for joining us today and hope you find it very useful, and see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Everyone. Thank you, Michael.
Michael, Geraldine,
Saludos.
everybody else, take
Cuídense
care.
todos.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Javier.
So long, everyone.
Michael and everybody.
Terima kasih Bu Mariani, kasih Mbak Evan.
Ciao, Mazurki.
Thank you, Dorota.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you very much for everything. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Mr. Muhammad.
Bye.
Michael talk about translation يعني in the beginning of the meeting.
They translate what we're doing into Chinese, and sometimes they translate it into Spanish or Portuguese.
Yes, so translation is not available in all languages.
In Arabic, that is not available.
Not yet, but we might do that soon.
Okay.
Valeu, Michael. Forte abraço.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Especially Mohammed with all of your new coaches.
We can try it, the next meeting with Michael Hall.
Yes. Maybe after the next NST in Egypt, because we have like 20 people from Egypt and the Arab world registered for the coming NST.
Inshallah, yes. We are very excited to this training, Muhammad, to meet Michael Hall and all the group. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Jermaine is coming back.
And we're about to close the room, so.
Yeah, I think she was probably kicked out or something. Okay, so are we staying or are we going?
I think we're going.
Mike, we're going.
Yeah, I think it's time for Michael to have breakfast.
Okay. Because I was feeling like, it's like now we should have a after the party, after party, that one?
Yeah, Kopati, you're always wanting to party.
Where's the music?
We had so now just like a post. I don't know. Now that I'm very conscious of metaphors, it's not a post-mortem, but it's just like just us connecting afterwards and partying together. But thank you, Michael. Thank you, our first lady, as usual. Thank you, Karen. It was lovely to see you.
Thank you. And we're ending the meeting now. So see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Oh, okay.